Good afternoon, and it's lovely to see such a good turnout, including people from far and wide. Joseph Hilaire Pierre René Belloc was born on the 27th of July 1870 in La Celle-Saint-Claude, France, to a French father and an English mother. The family was at that time wealthy. He was born a few days before the outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War. They fled at the news of the French army's collapse. Their home was looted and vandalized by Prussian soldiers, and although it was made habitable again, this and 2 world wars gave Belloc strong feelings against Germany, which he called Prussia. Belloc's father died when he was aged 2 years old, having been wiped out in a stock market crash. His mother brought the children to England. He grew up in Slindon, Sussex. The area inspired poetry and is depicted in the first drinking song and Harnacker Mill, which we will hear shortly. Belloc studied at John Henry Newman's Oratory School, Edgbaston, Birmingham, where he gained a foundation in classics and historical studies. He left school in 1887. Belloc began and abruptly ended a career in the French Navy, first as a land agent on the Duke of Norfolk's estate and as an architectural draftsman. Having met Elodie Hogan from a devoutly Catholic family in America, in London, when she was on a European tour with her mother and sister around 1890, Belloc began a lot of catching steamships to the US and impoverished walking back and forth across the continent in search of true love. Around 1891, to maintain his French citizenship, Belloc undertook a year's military service with an artillery regiment near Toul in France. In January 1893, Belloc passed the entrance exam to Balliol College, Oxford, where he read history. While at Oxford, he was elected president of the Oxford Union, their debating society. He and fellow undergraduate Anthony Henley also achieved the record-breaking feat of walking from Carfax Tower to Marble Arch, a distance of some 55 miles, in 11.5 hours. He graduated with a first-class honours in around June 1895. In 1895, Belloc published Verses and Sonnets, and in 1896, The Bad Child's Book of Beasts came out, illustrated by Blackwood. This book satirized moralistic verse for children and proved immensely popular. It is thought to contain some of Belloc's best light verse. These books launched his literary career. In 1896, Belloc finally married Elodie at Napa, California. More light verse followed in 1898 with The Modern Traveller. In 1899, Belloc began a series of biographies, including of French revolutionaries. Danton came out that same year. Lambkin's Remains came out in 1900, showing Belloc's mastery for satire and irony. Robespierre, another French revolutionary biography, was published in 1901. The biographies are lively historical writing. Perhaps Belloc's most famous book, The Path to Rome, came out in 1902. It intersperses an account of a pilgrimage on foot from Toul to Rome, with comments on the nature and history of Europe. And I sometimes wonder what Belloc would make of the situation with Europe today. Belloc's ardent Catholic faith colours much of his writing. In 1902, Belloc became a naturalised British subject. 1904 saw the publication of Mr. Burden, More Satire. Cautionary tales for children followed in 1907. From 1906 to 1910, Belloc served as Member of Parliament for Salford, first as a Liberal, then as an Independent. He was one of the first openly Roman Catholic members of Parliament. Being a Liberal MP was an unusual political choice for a man opposed to women's suffrage. But this is one of the contradictions I find with Belloc. He abandoned politics for journalism, believing the latter to be more effective at achieving reform. In 1912, The Four Men was published, describing a walk through the Sussex countryside. Also in 1912, Belloc published an essay entitled The Servile State, calling for a return to familial self-sufficiency, in which every family would own 3 acres and a cow. This was rightly described both as quaint and ludicrous. Together with his friend and collaborator, G.K. Chesterton, he advocated distributionism, a return to a medieval Catholic European society, a monarchist state in which everyone farmed their church-allotted plot of land. In 1914, his wife died, aged just 43, probably from cancer. They had 5 children. Belloc wore mourning dress for the rest of his life and kept her room as he had left it. From 1914 to 1920, he edited Land and Water. Otherwise, from here on, Belloc lived by his writing, which was often financially insecure. Belloc supported World War I and worked for the Propaganda Bureau, in spite of the loss of several people close to him in the conflict. In 1918, Belloc's son was killed whilst serving in Royal Flying Corps, northern France. More historical writing came with Europe and the Faith, 1920. Belloc worked with Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton, on a widely read weekly journal called The Eyewitness, advocating distributionism. But they were ridiculed by Bernard Shaw, who called them the Chester Belloc and characterised them as an absurd pantomime beast, Little Englanders. Perhaps Bernard Shaw had forgotten that the pair had uncovered the Marconi scandal in 1912. The paper became the New Witness in 1925, GK's weekly. Belloc compiled a history of England in 4 volumes, 1925 to 1931. There was a biography of James II in 1928 and Wolsey in 1930. His historical writing is, sadly, prone to inaccuracy and overemphasis, but it brings the past to life. There was a poem in praise of wine, 1932, and his love of sailing is vividly illustrated in The Cruise of the Nona, 1935. Belloc's literary exchanges with H.G. Wells were his last triumph as a man of letters. Although Belloc was more popular at the time, it is possible that Wells was more realistic. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, Belloc's views were increasingly pushed aside by a public who did not want a return to medieval social structures. The anti-Semitism in some of Belloc's work is also a problem, and I rapidly had to change my mind about doing one of the poems because of this. I was very keen to do a poem called Noel, which I half remembered, about the bells go ding and the bells go dong, or whatever it is, carol on, carol ah. But when I reread it and noted the anti-Semitism, sadly, I quickly changed my mind. However, Belloc expressed deep outrage at the Holocaust. 1937, Belloc delivered an exhausting series of lectures at Fordham University, New York. In 1941, another son died while serving in 4th Battalion, the Royal Marines, in Scotland. That same year, Belloc suffered a stroke from which he never fully recovered. Then he suffered burns and shock after falling on his fireplace. Belloc died on the 16th of July, 1953, at Mount Alvernia Nursing Home, Guildford, Surrey. He is buried at the Church of Our Lady of Consolation and St. Francis, West Grinstead, where he had been a regular attender. Notwithstanding being a noted disputant with long-running feuds, and his jaded view of academia, which Belloc regarded as turning students into little capitalists, Belloc was a prolific writer in every genre except drama. He was the greatest writer of light verse since Edward Lear, and Auden said of him that in this area Belloc had few equals and no superiors. Belloc's children's writing is admired to this day. Well, I've got some 13 or so poems for you, ladies and gentlemen. Belloc did some epigrams. These are little poetic nuggets, and as customers of my Poetry Gold enterprise will note, good poetry doesn't have to be long, just a little plug there, you know. So, Belloc did these epigrams, and I'm going to sprinkle a few of them through this recital like sort of salt and pepper. And here is one. This epigram is entitled On His Books. When I am dead, I hope it may be said, his sins were scarlet, but his books were red. My first 3 longer poems are all on the subject of sleep, so I'm hoping that you will still be awake at the end of them, because there is something truly brilliant of Belloc's coming after that. This first one is a sonnet entitled February. Belloc did a sort of calendar, a poem for each month of the year, and this is the one for February. The winter moon has such a quiet car that all the winter nights are dumb with rest. She drives the gradual dark with drooping crest, and dreams go wandering from her drowsy star. Because the nights are silent, do not wake, but there shall tremble through the general earth, and over you a quickening and a birth. The sun is near the hilltop for your sake. The latest born of all the days shall creep to kiss the tender eyelids of the year, and you shall wake, grown young with perfect sleep, and smile at the new world and make it dear with living murmurs more than dreams are deep. Silence is dead, my dawn. The morning's here. The next one is another sonnet, and it's entitled "O My Companion." Well, it doesn't really have a title. It just has the first line of the first verse as its title. A benison is a benediction, I believe, and Auriol, Aurion, is a reference to light. So anyway, here we go. O my companion, O my sister, sleep. The valley is all before us. Bear me on. High through the heaven of evening, hardly gone. Beyond the harbour lights, beyond the steep, beyond the land and its lost benison, to where, majestic, on the darkening deep, the night comes forward from Mount Auriol. O my companion, O my sister, sleep. Above the surf line into the night breeze, eastward above the ever-whispering seas, through the warm airs with no more watch to keep, my days run out and all its dooms are graven. O dear forerunner of death and promise of heaven, O my companion, O my sister, sleep. Actually, I've just read it, but that's quite an easy one to learn because 3 of the 14 lines are identical. So it's just quite helpful. This next poem is sort of like a prayer or a lullaby, and this is called The Night. And despite its beginning, I don't think that it is intended to be about Christmas. Most holy night that still dost keep the keys of all the doors of sleep, to me when my tired eyelids close, give thou repose. And let the far lament of them that chaunt the dead day's requiem make in my ears, who wakeful lie, soft lullaby. Let them that guard the horned moon by my bedside their memories croon. So shall I have new dreams and blessed in my brief rest. Fold your great wings about my face, hide dawning from my resting place, and cheat me with your false delight, most holy night. I think we all know that feeling of wishing the night could somehow be made to be extended because we haven't had enough rest and we would like a little more. Now, this next poem is well known. I think it is brilliant. Tarantella is a dance. Tarantella is a poem set in Italy. There is a war on, and we are in the mountains. Whether or not the tarantella was a cure for or a consequence of a tarantula bite need not be something that we should dwell on here, I feel. But this is the ever brilliant tarantella. Do you remember an inn, Miranda? Do you remember an inn? And the tedding and the spreading and the straw for a bedding and the fleas that tease in the high Pyrenees and the wine that tasted of the tar and the cheers and the jeers of the young muleteers under the vine of the dark veranda. Do you remember an inn, Miranda? Do you remember an inn? And the cheers and the jeers of the young muleteers who hadn't got a penny and who weren't paying any, and the hammer at the doors and the din, and the hip-hop hap at the clap of the hands to the twirl and the swirl of the girl gone glancing, dancing, chancing, backing and advancing, snapping of the clapper to the spin, out and in, and the ting-tong-tang of the guitar. Do you remember an inn, Miranda? Do you remember an inn? Nevermore, Miranda, nevermore. Only the high peaks hoar, and Aragon a torrent at the door. No sound in the walls of the halls where falls the tread of the feet of the dead to the ground. No sound, but the boom of the far waterfall, like doom. I find the rhythm is what really makes it with some of Belloc's poetry. And I think there is so much in that. When I was learning it for the Bristol Drama Festival earlier in the year, I thought, no, she doesn't remember an inn, just shut up, stop going on about it. But it's a very brilliant poem in the way that it combines the kind of terrible with the brilliant. Anyway. Harnacker Mill is a poem which I referred to earlier. This is one for Sally. Okay. This poem was inspired by... There was a mill that had been struck by lightning in 1905. The poem was written in 1923. And the poem clearly conveys the fact that the mill was derelict and the working parts had kind of fallen down. So, but does it also convey a sense of mourning for a lost way of life? So yeah, the mill was struck by lightning in 1905. We're now at 1923. And this is a derelict mill. And mourning the loss of a way of life which probably wasn't coming back after World War I. Harnacker Mill. Sally is gone that was so kindly. Sally is gone from Harnacker Hill. And the briar grows ever since then so blindly, and ever since then the clapper is still, and the sweeps have fallen from Harnacker Mill. Harnacker Hill is in desolation, ruin atop and a field unploughed, and spirits that call on a fallen nation, spirits that loved her calling aloud, spirits abroad in a windy cloud, spirits that call and no one answers. Harnacker's down and England's done, wind and thistle for pipe and dancers, and never a ploughman under the sun, never a ploughman, never a one. If I could change anything about that poem, I hope that came across okay as well as the previous one. If I could change anything about it, I would get across more the fact of a whole generation of young men being lost in World War I. And, yeah. Belloc's deep Christian faith in the Roman Catholic tradition is beautifully portrayed in this next poem called Our Lord and Our Lady. And he tells a story so simply and sorrowfully put. Here it is. They warned Our Lady of the child that was our blessed Lord, and she took him into the desert wild, over the camel's ford. And a long song she sang to him, and a short story told. And she wrapped him in a woolen cloak to keep him from the cold. But when our Lord was grown a man, the rich they dragged him down, And they crucified him in Golgotha, out and beyond the town. They crucified him on Calvary upon an April day. And because he had been her little son, she followed him all the way. Our Lady stood beside the cross, a little space apart. And when she heard our Lord cry out, a sword went through her heart. They laid our Lord in a marble tomb, dead in a winding sheet. But Our Lady stands above the world with the white moon at her feet. A complete change of tone now with the first drinking song. What I really like about the poetry of Hilaire Belloc, apart from the ever-brilliant Tarantella, is the depictions of the countryside, and you don't get very much of that now. Well, I suppose you probably get more than you used to when I was growing up, but I suppose arguably there is somewhat less countryside to describe, at least in the southern half of England, probably. You can debate that over lunch. So, but the depictions of the countryside, the characterfulness of the wording, and also his satire, which I will come to in a moment. But this is the first drinking song. On Sussex hills where I was bred, when lanes in autumn rains are red, when Arun tumbles in his bed and busy great gusts go by, when branches bare in Burton Glen and Berry Hill is a whitening then, I drink strong ale with gentlemen, which nobody can deny, 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 which nobody can deny. In half November off I go to push my face against the snow and watch the winds wherever they blow, because my heart is high, till I settle me down in Steening to sing of the women I met in my wandering, and of all that I mean to do in the spring, which nobody can deny, 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 which nobody can deny. Then times be rude and weather be rough, and ways be foul and fortune tough, we're of the stout south country stuff, that never can have good ale enough, and do this chorus cry, from Crowborough top to Ditchling down, from Hurstpierpoint to Arundel town, the girls are plump and the ale is brown, which nobody can deny, 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 deny. If he does, he tells a lie. It's quite sort of sing-song, some of Belloc's poetry, but it probably depends how you put it across. Right, a couple of cautionary tales now. Keep these for your young friends in hand and for your older ones. This is the vulture. The vulture eats between his meals, and that's the reason why he very, very rarely feels as well as you and I. His eye is dull, his head is bald, his neck is growing thinner. Oh, what a lesson to us all, only to eat at dinner. This is the bison, the bison. Another cautionary verse. The bison is vain, and, I write it with pain, the doormat you see on his head is not, as some learned professors maintain, the opulent growth of a genius brain, but is sewn on with needle and thread. I'm just going to sort of follow that with the second of the epigrams, which I want to share with you today. This is called On Hygiene. Of old, when folk lay sick and sorely tried, the doctor gave them physic, and they died. But here's a happier age, for now we know both how to make men sick and keep them so. Now, I know Belloc has his great admirers, but one of the slight problems I have with him, I think he's very great in many ways, don't get me wrong. One of the slight problems I have with Belloc is his slightly sniffy attitude towards science. And I think he's sort of gone, oh, you lot don't know much, do you? And I never hear a scientist saying, oh, you poets don't know much, do you? So I just think his slightly sniffy attitude, the slightly sort of snooty attitude towards science, I have to say is not very reasonable. And at this point, half the audience have walked out and gone for the benefit of those online. But you can discuss that over lunch. Now, this poem is very different, and it's called The Chaunty of the Nona. Belloc was an enthusiastic sailor, and this poem is a frankly beautiful and very, very realistic picture painting of sailing. It has a lot of Welsh names in it. It doesn't have the really long one, but it has quite a lot of Welsh names in it. And what I want you to do, if you could please, is the last line of each verse is repeated. So you're welcome to engage in some audience participation. I'm going to have to speed up a bit. And repeat with me the last line of each verse. This is the Chaunty of the Nona, and you would have to be an actual sailor to be able to write about sailing this brilliantly, I would say. Come list all ye cullies and doxes so dear, you shall hearken to the tale of the bold marineer, that took ship out of Holyhead and drove her so hard, past Bardsey, Porchelly, Portmaddock and Fishguard. Past Bardsey, Porchelly, Portmaddock and Fishguard. Then he dropped out of Fishguard on a calm summer's day, past Strumbles, St. David's, and across St. Bride's Bay. Circumnavigating Skoma, that island around, with the heart of a lion he threaded Jack Sound. Your turn. With the heart of a lion he threaded Jack Sound. Thank you. Then from out the main ocean there rolled a great cloud, so he clawed into Milford Haven by the fog blast so loud, until he dropped anchor in a deep wooded bay, where all night with old sleep and quiet sadness he lay, where all night with old sleep and quiet sadness he lay. Next morning was a doldrum, and he whistled for a breeze, which came from the nor'-nor'-westward all across the high seas. In passing St. Govan's lightship, he gave them good night, but before it was morning, he raised Lundy light. But before it was morning, he raised Lundy light. Then he tossed for 12 hours in that horrible place, which is known to the mariner as the Great White Horse Race, till with a slant about 3 bells, or maybe near 4, he saw white water breaking upon loud Appledore. He saw white water breaking upon loud Appledore. The pirates of Appledore, the wines of in stow, but her nose is for Bideford with the tide at the flow. Rattle anchor, batten hatches, and falls all lie curled. The long bridge of Bideford is the end of the world. The long bridge of Bideford is the end of the world. I think we have some true Belloc experts here. Thank you for participating in that. My penultimate epigram is this. It's of Lady Poltergrew, a public peril. The devil, having nothing else to do, went off to tempt my Lady Poltergrew. My lady, tempted by a private whim, to his extreme annoyance tempted him. He has a sense of humour, does Hilaire Belloc, to be fair. Right, a couple of pieces of satire now. If I may, before I close. A scholarly audience such as yourselves will be familiar with the Bible tale of Dives and Lazarus. Dives, if you prefer. Dives was the rich man, Lazarus the poor. Here, Belloc, never knowingly not left wing, I think is firmly on the side of Lazarus, it's fair to say. And here, as you will know, being all great Greek and Roman scholars, they are crossing the river Styx, and this is their respective conversations with the ferryman. So here we are, a couple of pieces of satire and one final sonnet and a bit of epigram, then we're done. So this is my first piece of satire. This is called To Dives. Dives, when you and I go down to hell, where scribblers end and millionaires as well, we shall be carrying on our separate backs two very large but very different packs. And as you stagger under yours, my friend, down the dull shore where all our journeys end, and go before me, as your rank demands, towards the infinite flat underlands, and that dear river of forgetfulness, Charon, a man of exquisite address, for, as your wife's progenitors can tell, they're very strict on etiquette in hell. Well, since you are a lord, observe, my lord, we cannot take these weighty things aboard. Then down they go, my wretched Dives, down. The 15 sorts of boots you keep for town. The hat to meet the devil in. The plain but costly ties. The cases of champagne. The solid watch. The seal, the chain, the charm. The working model of a burning farm to give the little Belials. All the 3 biscuits for Severus. The guarantee from Lambeth that the rich can never burn, and even promising a safe return. The admirable overcoat, designed to cross Cocytus, very warmly lined. Sweet Dives, you will leave them all behind and enter hell as tattered and as bare as was your father when he took the air behind a barrow load in Leicester Square. Then turned to me, and noting one that brings with careless step a mist of shadowy things, laughter and memories and a few regrets, some honour and a quantity of debts, a doubt or two of sorts, a trust in God, and, what will seem to you extremely odd, his father's grandfather's name, unspoiled, untitled, even spelt the same. Charon, who 20,000 times before has ferried poets to the ulterior shore, will estimate the weight I bear and cry, "Comrade." He has himself been known to try his hand at Latin and Italian verse, much in the style of Virgil, only worse. We let such vain imaginaries pass. Then tell me, Dives, which will look the ass, you or myself, or Charon? Who can tell? They order things so damnably in hell. I think of all the poems today, well, apart from Tarantella, that might be my favourite, but it's a very close run. It's a very close contest. Very close contest. The other little piece of satire I have for you is entitled "The Justice of the Peace." I have to say, I think his view of the judiciary, magistrates and people and judges, little bit embittered, maybe. I don't think they're really like this. And I do speak as one who's brought some Equality Act cases in the civil court, won the odd one, lost the odd one. I think he's being a little bit unfair, but it's a jolly good poem. It's a very good poem, and about the class society. Yeah, he's not wrong about class. So anyway, enough from me. Here we go. This is "The Justice of the Peace." And like the last one, this is a poem of marked contrasts. Distinguish carefully between these two. This thing is yours, that other thing is mine. You have a shirt, a brimless hat, a shoe, and half a coat. I am the Lord benign of 50 acres of fat land, to which I have a right. You understand? I have a right because I have, because I have a right. Now, be quite calm and good, obey the laws, remember your low station. Do not fight against the goad, because it pricks whenever the uncleanly demos kicks. I do not envy you your hat, your shoe. Why should you envy me my small estate? It's fearfully illogical in you to fight with economic force and fate. Moreover, I have got the upper hand, and I mean to keep it. Do you understand? I once heard it said, someone once told me that someone had worked at a porter's lodge in Oxford. He'd worked as a porter, and when the students all arrived at the start of their university education, you could tell which ones had been to private school, not by the clothes they wore, not even necessarily by their accent, but because they had confidence. And I'm sure as well we've all known people who just had a sense of entitlement to get on in life, and one way or another, that served them quite well. Anyway, my final epigram is this. It's called "To a Dead Hostess." Of this bad world, the loveliest and the best have smiled and said good night and gone to rest. That's a lovely thought, isn't it? Well, I'm going to close now with one final poem, and which brings to the fore the two great loves of Belloc's life, his wife Elodie and his profound Catholic Christian faith. Before I do that, Please remember, ladies and gentlemen, to give generously to lunchtime concerts here at St Stephen's, Lunchtime Live. I hope if you're listening online later that you're still awake. If you can find a way of giving as well, we would really appreciate that. I really, really appreciate a live audience turning up, because it is Lunchtime Live. We've also I'm very grateful to John for suggesting Hilaire Belloc as our poet for this year, and also to Rhodri for filming the recitals, and David for organising things, and he won't want me to say it, but Roger for dictating things. But it does really depend on a live audience to keep this whole show on the road, giving generously, as David said before. I also have some merchandise for sale. You can pay for that by cash or card. I have CDs, £5 a piece. I have packs of Christmas cards, £5 a piece. I have Christmas books, £2.50, and individual cards, £1. So £5, £2.50, and £1. I've left some brochures about my singing at the back, and there are also some green and gold business cards about Poetry Gold. That is my daily poetic text service. There is no fixed charge, but people are asked to pay whatever they feel like, whenever they feel they can pay it. It's entirely up to them. If they're completely skint, they could have a long time off paying. So, without further ado, thank you for staying a little over time. This is Her Faith. This is a sonnet. It's a Petrarchan sonnet. It's a very beautiful sonnet. And it shows great humility. And have we all not doubted at one time or other in our life? And it shows a very human side of the heart of Belloc. And this really brings together, as I say, his love of his wife and his deep faith, the two great loves in his life. So I commend to you Hilaire Belloc. This is Her Faith. Because my faltering feet may fail to dare the first descendant of the steps of hell, give me the word in time that triumphs there. I too must pass into the misty hollow where all our living laughter stops. And hark, the tiny stuffless voices of the dark have called me, till I needs must follow. Give me the word, and I'll attempt it well. Say it's the little winking of an eye, which in that issue is uncurtained quite. A little sleep that helps a moment by, between the thin dawn and the large daylight. Ah, tell me more than yet was hoped of men. Swear it's true now, and I'll believe it then. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Next year, we travel north to the Lake District and Daffodils. It's William Wordsworth.